Happy National Roller Coaster Day to all
Hey!
of our viewers. It's a beautiful day here in the UK, perfect to visit some of our fabulous parks. Unfortunately for me and Rob, due to work commitments, we've been unable to visit a park today. So what we thought we'd just do something a little bit different and thought we'd discuss some of the fabulous rides that we have ridden this year to celebrate National Roller Coaster Day. And we went for a bit of a controversial topic for today, which was to compare our favourite SLCs, suspended loop coasters in the UK. There are three that we have ridden this year, and they're the ones that we're going to kind of have a bit of a chat about. And I thought what we'd probably have a look at is the theming of those rides, the rideability, the operations, and just which one is really the best. And I know it's a really obvious choice to kind of go directly to Nemesis Reborn. Um,
Yeah.
Easily the best known in the country, but is it the best? That's something I think we should explore today. Rob, I know you've got a real nostalgic love for Nemesis in its original form. I've ridden Nemesis Reborn probably 5 or 6 times this year. You haven't been able to get on it just yet, but what are your thoughts on it, particularly in terms of theming? Is there anything better?
Well, it's a bit conflicting for me, really, because as you said, I've got some real nostalgia for Nemesis. I remember going to the park in the early 90s, not long after the ride opened in 94. I think I was actually too short to ride it in 1994 because I'm not that old. But a couple of years later, I did get to ride Nemesis and it absolutely blew me away, really. I think the really interesting thing about Nemesis is the constraints that Alton Towers has. So they can't build above the tree line. So they had to go underground and they blasted out a huge area to put the coaster in. Built by Bolliger and Mabillard, Swiss manufacturer. It was the first suspended looping coaster in Europe, not in the world, as some people think. The first one in the world, I think, was at Great Flags America, potentially Batman the Ride. So this is kind of based on that, but with theming which has really never been seen before. Some really interesting elements that's certainly not been seen in the UK. So obviously the lift hill into a bit of a short drop and left-hand turn, then straight into a corkscrew, going through into a vertical loop and down into a zero G roll, followed by another corkscrew at the end, which is practically at eye level of anybody in the queue. And if you've been on Nemesis, you'll have seen that the queue actually goes right around the ride, adding to that experience. I remember when I was there, rivers of red blood, it was meant to be flowing down the waterfalls. They've switched that off now. I think there were some concerns with the environment and the water on site, so that doesn't happen anymore. But I know you've been since
Yeah,
the re
absolutely. And I think that not a re-theme because it's still the Nemesis that we've always loved and enjoyed, but the theming of that entire area now just makes this such an immersive ride. You feel ready to ride Nemesis as soon as you enter Forbidden Valley at Alton Towers. You've got live actors, and I was at Alton Towers only 2 weeks ago thinking, will they still be there? You know, it reopened in March. Live actors are still there, still patrolling. You've got the absolutely magnificent Nemesis Eye, which kind of follows you around the track and emits the mist as you come past. I really do think it's probably a second to none experience in terms of theming for not only for SLCs in the country, but probably for any roller coaster that we've got in the UK. With that
does it
being
still
said,
roar?
there is definitely still a roar, and I know you love the roar. There's definitely a bit of a roar. Obviously, now that it's a little bit of a smoother ride, we see less of that roar now, which we do still see in our second coaster, which is a coaster I particularly like and really underrated, I think, and that's Kamali at Flamingo Land, which also I think has got a really good elements of theming. It's called Kamali after the head of the Pride of Lions at Flamingo Land, so it's a really nice link to their heritage, and it's got a really great kind of Serengeti theming and colour scheme to go with it. It's got that really vibrant yellow. You can see it when you enter the park. It's got the lake underneath it. And when you go over that Cobra Roll, you are almost suspended over that lake. So there are definitely great elements of theming to Kamali. And I think it's going to come up a bit more in our other discussion about which is the best SLC. But I think theming wise, we're going to have to hand it to Nemesis, unless you think Infusion's going to offer us anything.
Well, it's an interesting one. So the third one we're going to talk about is Infusion at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. For those of you that have seen our videos, you'll have seen that we've got a particular love for this park. It is what we call our home park. Infusion is a really interesting SLC. It's not one of the custom made, it's one of the standard models. I think it's the Mark III model. Interestingly, it was actually built in 1999 for Pleasureland Southport. I remember actually riding this back in, it must have been 2006, just before the park closed in Pleasureland, and it was quite traumatic at that point, to be perfectly frank. It was rattly, it's big, it's really intense. It's not a huge layout, and a lot of the elements come quite quickly, really, one after the other. What's really interesting, one of the elements is a butterfly loop. I think it must be the only butterfly loop within the UK, certainly on an SLC anyway. So that is certainly quite intense. It's over the water, and with that comes lots of water effects. So there's fountains that are timed with the movement of the coaster going past. There's also a really interesting opposite way around waterfall, if that makes sense, as you go up into one of the inversions. And when all these effects work in, it's actually really quite a stunning ride. Unfortunately, the last couple of times we've been, Hayley, the effects haven't been working.
No, they really haven't. And it's been quite disappointing because I do think that takes away from any kind of theming it has. It's this really dominating blue coaster, which I particularly love seeing kind of strong colour themes on coasters. And I do think the blue works really well, but without the water effects, it can be a bit disappointing. It looks a bit grubby when the water effects are turned off as well, which doesn't add to the aesthetic of the ride. What I do love about Infusion, and there are very few things I love about Infusion, is that it's a great kind of interaction with the other coasters at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which you just don't get with any of these other rides. You've got the big one right next to it, you've got the Big Dipper as well. And when you're going up that lift hill and you can see the other coasters and hear the screams of people enjoying them, it does add to that kind of theming that you are at a really traditional amusement park. So I am going to give Infusion a little bit of credit there for some of its theming, but in terms of actually being a themed coaster, it does feel a little bit kind of plonked to me. And I do think it is a much rougher ride. Certainly Nemesis Reborn feels a lot smoother since the retrack. There's still a little bit of a rattle there, but it doesn't really affect the riding of it. And I've ridden it at the front and the back now, and it feels much smoother. Kamali, arguably, I would say, is probably the smoothest SLC in the country. It really flies. It feels incredibly smooth, and considering it's a 2006 coaster, it's got some older style restraints. It's not so much of a headbanger, but for me, the real issues with Infusion, in terms of comparing it with these other two coasters, is it's just so rough, and I've come off that ride a couple of times with a headache.
I think it's good to say that operations are not too bad really on Infusion. When it's busy, they run it on a two-train service. I think the times we've ridden it's just been a one-train service, but the part's been really quiet.
Yeah, we've never really
Been
tried to ride it, and we didn't actually ride it at late night riding either. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how busy that queue was for it. I think it was optimizing about 90 minutes on Infusion on two trains. So I don't know if that was slightly poorer operations, or actually is the ride just more nostalgic and popular than perhaps we give it credit for. Whereas Kamali, which we've ridden on an off-peak day, has almost been a walk-on, which has been really great. Nemesis, again, operations kind of seem a little bit up and down, but in general, kind of with General Merlin operations, it does go down quite a bit, and it does come back into operation quite quickly. So it's not a huge delay. And I've seen Nemesis running on two trains on even kind of off-peak days. So I think operations wise, it's hard to kind of decide which of those coasters generally has the most excellent operations.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the big thing for Nemesis for me, and I think, I mentioned this before, is that nostalgia. But I really cannot wait to ride it again. I really hope that's this year, work permitting. We'll see what happens there. But
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of to summarize, there's some really great elements on Kamali and Infusion. I think it's hard to kind of beat Nemesis just on that theming, just on that excitement that you get riding it. It feels like something really special. It feels like almost a treat. If I had to choose one of those today for National Roller Coaster Day, I think I would be hard pressed not to choose Nemesis. We haven't talked about Nemesis's sister coaster over at Fort Park, Nemesis Inferno. There's also Odyssey as well to consider.
Yeah, Odyssey at Fantasy Island in Inglemells, which is the third Vekoma SLC in the country. It's often voted as the best Vekoma SLC just because of the smoothness of it, and also you've got the view over Inglemells and Skegness. It's got a really high drop, and yeah, like I say, it's meant to be really smooth. And in terms of other vlogs, we'll have another vlog from Blackpool in September. We're going to do a bit of a tour around the Big Blue Hotel as well, which we absolutely love, especially if we've got a coaster view room.
I
And
might
then
even let you take me on Infusion now.
you're gonna
I'm gonna, yeah, I'm gonna.
definitely.
And then
And then
afterwards, we're going
so
somewhere
excited. We're both
really
talk about
excited.
it.
Where are we going in November?
Efteling. So we're
Yeah.
going across to the Netherlands, taking the ferry across from Hull. We're going to drive across to Efteling, which is meant to be one of the most magical theme parks in the world. It really is magical. There are some thrill rides there, but the main reason we're going is to kind of see that kind of nostalgic element, the fairy tales, some cracking rides, Symbolica, which I know Hayley in particular is really looking forward to.
Literally cannot
So
wait.
that's in November to kind of end the UK theme park, UK and Europe theme park season. So
Absolutely.
look
And I
out for
think
that.
what's going to be so good about Efteling is those on-ride POVs that we'll be able to get, which is going to be really exciting. So please do come along and brave the adventures for us for that. If you like what you're watching, if you want to come on more adventures with me and Rob, please do give us a like, a shameless subscribe to our channel so that we can continue growing. If you're out riding roller coasters this week to celebrate National Roller Coaster Day, let's make it a whole weekend. Go have fun, go brave the adventures, and we will see you soon.